Well, I would like to welcome everyone who is joining by Zoom today. Of course, 2020 has thrown us a huge curveball, and as realtors do, we back up, assess, and adjust. And so we have Dr. Yoon joining us by Zoom today, and we're really excited that he has been able to commit some time to talk to us about the economic outlook. And of course, as realtors, we're all interested in his thoughts on how this pandemic is going to affect the economy and obviously ultimately affect our industry. Dr. Lawrence Yoon has a PhD and he's the Chief Economist and Senior Vice President of Research for the National Association of REALTORS. Dr. Yoon oversees and is responsible for a wide range of research activity for the association, including NAR's existing home sales statistics, affordability index, and home buyer and seller profile report. He regularly provides commentary on real estate market trends for its 1.4 million realtors and is often a guest for different outlets on the media that are interested in what he has to say and his research. And so I'll skip the next 6 pages of his bio, which is rather long, but we would like to welcome Dr. Yoon. And Dr. Yoon, on behalf of the Mississippi Association of Realtors, we thank you again for your time this morning and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Keith, or I should say President Keith Henley, for inviting me to be with Mississippi Realtors. I know many realtors from Mississippi, terrific in terms of their volunteerism, advocating on behalf of the private property rights. Adam Watkins, he's still, I believe, on the research committee, which means that many of the research activity that my staff conducts is, guidance through like people like Adam Watkins. And congratulations to your Mississippi Realtor, who I will be working closely in the upcoming years, Nancy Lane, being elected as the treasurer, part of the NAR leadership team. So Mississippi is well represented. So let me go into how I see the market developing after this disruption that we encountered due to the pandemic. The economies are steadily reopening. Mississippi, I'm not sure where it is in terms of phase 1, phase 2, but here in Virginia, I'm just directly across the river from Washington, D.C. I see now people eating inside a restaurant. Last week, it was just outdoors. But now they can eat indoors with 50% capacity, social distancing. So steadily more getting engagement with the back to normal conditions. As an economist, I speak much better with the PowerPoint. So if you can bear with me as I will upload the PowerPoint, hold 1 second. Okay, here we are. So let me start out with the economy first, because economy certainly impacts many aspects of the both residential and the commercial real estate. And the economic picture, as the data collected so far, is not pretty. Now, we are at the early stage of reopening, so I expect the economic numbers to turn for the better, but the available data, which is a bit of lagging indicator, is indicating that in the first quarter, the economy shrank by 5%, and this was led to the spending decline by the consumers and business community. The residential investment, which comprise both home building, home sales, and remodeling expenditure at home, grew by 18% in the first quarter, even as the economy overall contracted, just to indicate how strong the housing market had been. The next 2 lines is quite interesting because it is not the first quarter. I want to use the most available up-to-date information. And the month of April, personal income actually rose by 12% across the country, even in the midst of pandemic, even in the midst of job cuts. And how is that possible? because entrepreneurial income has fallen, people's wages overall because of job cuts have fallen. So how is personal income rising? Because the stimulus checks, government sent out the stimulus checks. The unemployment insurance benefit is quite generous. The federal government added $600 to the normal unemployment insurance that Mississippi would have provided. And all these stimulus measures like small business administration loan that may not need to be paid back to the government if you meet certain criteria. So all this massive stimulus has boosted people's income on average. Now, I understand that some people are worse off because of the pandemic, but on average, people actually have higher income, which is quite surprising. Now, with more income, what are people doing with it? Well, the restaurants were shut down. You could not attend baseball game. So people simply save up the money. So the savings rate in April was 33% of people's income, much, much, much higher than the normal 8% that people saved up, which means that as the economy goes into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 reopening, there could be some spending unleashed into the economy. So because there's a financial resource for, on average, with Americans with more money now than before. But the job market is certainly a troublesome figure. The leisure and hospitality sector took the brunt of the job losses. So in areas like Biloxi, I'm sure as hotels emptying, very little activity, at least during the height of the pandemic. So Disney World shut down, airline running at only 10% of the capacity. So large job cuts in the leisure and hospitality. It may take some time to fully get back online until the vaccine is discovered. But the other sectors of the economy, I am much more optimistic. Education and health sector lost 2.5 million jobs in April. And especially the healthcare sector is somewhat surprising because we see on the television the heroic efforts by nurses and doctors to treat the COVID patients, ventilators, and everything. Heroic efforts. We want to applaud them. Yet there were fewer nurses working or doctors working in April. There were job cuts. And so how is it possible? Because anything that was not related to COVID had to shut down. Dental offices shut down, they had to lay off workers. The hip surgery surgeons and their related healthcare workers all let go because they said we have to focus on COVID-19. But we know that people need dental care. We know that people who have postponed hip replacement surgery now can steadily go back into the operating. And therefore, all these job losses that occurred in the healthcare sector will be swinging positively as the economy reopens. Also, the construction jobs. One thing that I've been hearing from the realtors is that we are short on inventory. So we need to build more homes. So construction jobs, which have been temporarily laid off, will come positively. So much of the jobs, aside from the leisure and hospitality, I expect to be steadily coming around with the reopening of the economy. This is the US job market before I go into the Mississippi. So the US job market from year 2000 to current looks like the following. So in the middle part of the, say 2007, 2008, there was a job growth, but that was somewhat artificial, driven by the subprime lending, which then exploded, led to the foreclosure crisis. So we faced a recession and we lost jobs. But since the low point of 2010, we have had a 10 straight years of job creation, longest economic expansion ever. Then a pandemic hit, and look what happened. All the job gains of 10 years we lost in a single month. But as I mentioned, many of those job losses are only temporary, and much of the job gain should begin to reappear as the economy steadily reopens. If we look at the Mississippi situation, it looks like the following. In fact, Mississippi was somewhat of an underperformer compared to the rest of the country. So you see some swings, very similar subprime lending activity, then foreclosure crisis, and then job creation for 10 years, and then suddenly single month massive job losses. So this is not only about going back to 2007 or year 2000, but it is much less than year 2000. Certainly in terms of the taxes or regulation, it's much more business-friendly environment in Mississippi. I mean, we see strong job creation in the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, what I consider to be SEC conference, football SEC conference, but somehow it's not translating into Mississippi, and Louisiana is heavily oil dependent. So, Louisiana just follows oil. So I'm not sure what's going on related to the state, but the overall slight underperformance in terms of job creation in the state of Mississippi. But the worst in the employment condition, in my view, is over. Because when I look at the number of people filing for unemployment insurance, it's steadily diminishing with each passing week, which is very good. The media says the following, which is factually correct but misleading. So many media will say, you look at how many people are filing for unemployment check, and all this cumulative impact from mid-March to today, it is 44 million people. So they constantly pound that number. 44 million people have lost jobs. Factually correct, but misleading. And here's why it's misleading. You look at how many people are still in unemployment and receiving checks. And the number is not 44 million, but it's half that, 22 million. So what this means is that someone who may have lost a job at a hotel in Biloxi, maybe now they have found job, as a truck driver, working for FedEx, Amazon. So underneath the job cuts, there are job creation. So not everyone is remaining unemployed for a very long time. And hence, the number of people receiving unemployment check is only 22 million, not the 44 million people, the total of people filing for the first time. One of the things that NAR advocated on, and certainly we get all the state presidents involved, so thank you, Keith, in your efforts, is that we lobby hard in Washington to say, look, entrepreneurs like realtors were working hard before the pandemic, and it was the government who imposed the lockdown. It is unfair why realtors should suffer the financial consequences of that. So at least realtors should be able to tap into the unemployment insurance for the first time ever. So please tap into the resources that is available. We advocated hard so that during this disruption, realtors would have at least some level of financial resources to buy some time until the economy reopens and home sales begin to kick alive. So, but at least the employment condition, I think the worst condition is over, and please tap into the resources that is available for independent contractors. Now, if you would look at the state of Mississippi specifically, before the pandemic, it was just a little blip. But then you see the surge, and just like the number of people who are getting laid off and filing for unemployment insurance for the very first time declining, which means that you have flattened the curve, at least related to the employment condition, and the total number of people receiving unemployment check are steadily falling in Mississippi. This decline is much sharper compared to the rest of the country, which means there's a faster job creation going on in Mississippi. Again, FedEx, a job, perhaps people living in Northwest Mississippi near Memphis, because I know in Memphis, the FedEx, they're expanding, they're hiring many jobs. So perhaps, this is a faster decline in unemployment situation compared to the rest of the country. So at least in recent weeks, Mississippi outperforming compared to the rest of the country and fixing their unemployment situation. Here's the map of the US. Everyone can locate the state of Florida. So let me start with Florida. So what Florida is indicating is that you see that $47 attached to Florida. What does that mean? That means, and it's in a parentheses, it means that a typical worker in Florida who lost a job, lost income, but they're now getting unemployment checks. How much of the unemployment check are they short by compared to the wages they were earning? And in Florida, they're down about $47 per week. So say someone on average working for Disney World laid off, their unemployment check is a little shy compared to what they were earning. But if you look at Mississippi, it's exactly the opposite. It's $40 plus, which means that a person who may have lost a job at a casino and now is receiving unemployment check, their unemployment check is about $40 higher than the wages they lost. So it's about essentially a little over 100% income replacement on average. I know some people are worse off, other people a little better off, but on average in Mississippi, the unemployment check is essentially replacing the lost income and then some by small margin by $40. So unemployment picture is ugly, but at least people are getting that income support in the meantime. Now, the Federal Reserve this week came out with an announcement that they will be accommodative for the next 3 years, not this year, but for the next 3 years, which means that we will have low interest rate environment for the next 3 years. And the impact is really the following for the real estate professionals. Mortgage rates, record low mortgage rates averaging 3.2% in the latest week, all-time low. Blue line is the mortgage rates. The orange line is the 10-year treasury, and it follows a similar pattern. But look at the last data point. 10-year treasury is under 1%, which means that mortgage rate could fall even under 3%. So if you are patient and willing to be patient with your client for the next couple of weeks or even a couple of months, mortgage rates may actually go down under 3%. Possibility, not a guarantee, because mortgage rates sometimes can do its own thing. But I think there is a possibility that mortgage rate could go under 3%. These are all conforming mortgages or mortgages that can be backed by the government, FHA, VA, and also those mortgages that can be sold to Fannie and Freddie. So mortgage originators originate those mortgages. Consumers are unaware of Fannie and Freddie, but those mortgages were originated knowing that they can sell it to Fannie and Freddie. Fannie and Freddie cannot buy jumbo mortgages, and therefore jumbo mortgages are very difficult to obtain in the current environment. But I believe in Mississippi, most mortgages will be under the jumbo loan limit, so it should be working fine. This morning, I was speaking to realtors in New Jersey. Jumbo loans are very important in New Jersey where they have many million-dollar homes. And I said for upper end market, it could be quite tough because of the lack of jumbo mortgages. But in Mississippi, I think most people can obtain those record low mortgage rates. Now, related to the inventory situation, we were facing housing shortage before the pandemic, and now during the pandemic, we have even fewer listings. Hopefully, with the reopening in the economy, we see more listings beginning to pop out. But this chart also shows that we are in a completely different environment today versus foreclosure crisis of 10 years ago. Some of your clients may ask, should I be afraid? I don't want to buy in a declining market. I want to make sure what I am buying can preserve the value. And you should say, well, we are in a different state. Back 10 years ago, home builders built way too many homes. We had excess inventory. And also we had those funny mortgages where it stretched people's budget. We are completely different. First, home builders have been well restrained. They are not overproducing. In fact, they are underproducing. And second, we don't have those funny mortgages. All the recent home buyers, they had to meet the credit scores. They had to stay well within their budget in order to obtain mortgages. So we are in a completely different situation. Don't anticipate any price decline. Prices will be steadily rising because of record low mortgage rates and inventory being short. The first evidence of the pandemic impact we are seeing in terms of pending contracts. So it fell 20%, declined another 20% in April. The May figure is we are still compiling, and we expect a much better condition in May and even better condition in June. I'm looking at the early weeks of June as well. So I think the worst is over related to the pending contracts. But in terms of the commission checks, exchange of keys, different owners, it is the closings, not the pendings, which means that for the closings, the absolute low point could be in the month of June. But once we pass this month, things should be turning for the better. And in fact, the very early phase of home buying process is showing a very optimistic picture. Mortgage application to buy a home. As a realtor, you always say to your clients, qualify for the mortgage before even searching for a home. And what are we seeing related to mortgage activity? Before the pandemic, it was running about 10% higher compared to 1 year before. And during the pandemic, we were down 35%. Then now, in the latest week, it is running 20% above June of last year. So things are really popping out, at least related to mortgage application to buy a home. These are not refinances, only to buy a home. So buyers are taking out a mortgage. Then the next phase would be signing the contract, and after that, closings. So the early stage of home buying process, you can just simply look at the graph. This is a V-shaped recovery. Sharp decline followed by sharp rebound. So very nice trend, at least regarding mortgage application to buy a home. This data is from the Dallas Federal Reserve. They work with some technology companies to track mobile phones as to how they are moving in terms of GPS, I guess from one location to another. Are people staying at home or are people moving around? So zero line is indicating normal activity. Then we hit a pandemic. The blue is New Jersey, where I gave talk this morning. It's down much sharper because in New Jersey, governor is saying strict lockdown, don't go out. But in Mississippi, also the case, but you did not suffer that decline as much. But look what's happening with the reopening in the economy in the Mississippi. A faster reopening, people are moving from one location to another location, just in terms of whether they're going to the restaurant, other part of the town. So there's more movement, actual physical movement in Mississippi versus New Jersey, which is hinting that you may have a little faster recovery in Mississippi versus New Jersey. I mentioned about the inventory. So housing shortage that we had before the pandemic, we will continue to face that because home builders actually produced less home during the pandemic and we needed more production. So expect housing shortage for the remainder of the year and even into 2021. Some very nice home in a affordable price range. Do not be surprised if you get multiple offers. If you are representing buyer side, also keep that in mind. Buyer competition could be quite competitive. But if you are on the seller side, you should expect, again, homes should not linger on the marketplace for long. Within a month, you should be able to find a buyer. But on the upper end market, things could be a little soft on the very upper end. But the mid price and below, it should be very competitive. Buyers rushing into the market. This is an ugly picture as related to the federal budget deficit. This is a required deficit because of the massive stimulus we needed to put into the economy. Look what's happening. We have unemployment checks. We have small business loans, which may not need to be paid back. So government is running up a huge budget deficit. How are they financing this? And they're financing, without going into deep explanation, by printing money. So there's large amount of printing of the money to hand out unemployment check and stimulus check. And in America, we are very fortunate to have the US dollar as a global reserve currency status, with that status. What it means is that if you have a $20 bill, you can go to Mexico, or you can go to Vietnam, or you can go to Italy, show that $20 bill and say, I would like to have a haircut. And they will gladly give you a haircut for the $20. People accept the US dollars. So we can print money and not have any inflation. But in future years, with so much printing of the money, and we have to print more money next year, that we may begin to face something like 1970s style inflation. People who lived through the 1970s clearly remember that period of high inflation. So if we have high inflation, not this year, not next year, but say 5, 6, 7 years from now, what does it mean? That means the prices of food will be rising, prices of automobile, prices of real estate will be rising. So real estate value is a very good hedge against inflation, so you will be rising. College tuition, healthcare expense, everything rising. Even the Social Security check will be rising, even though your standard of living is not rising because everything is more expensive. But there's one major expenditure where the payment is fixed and not rising. And that is mortgage payment of those who are locking in at this super low mortgage rates. So you may want to relay the information to your client to say, with so much printing of the money, we may have inflation down the road, not this year or next year, but 5, 6, 7 years down the road, but your monthly payment will be absolutely fixed, but your real estate value will be rising. So one of the rare golden opportunity for people to buy a home, if they are able to, and benefit from rising inflation, but the mortgage payment is not rising. Something clearly to relate to your clients, because the facts are that we are printing a lot of money. We are uncertain about the inflation, how much, but at least with so much printing of the money, I think it raises the question about the potential inflation. Let me quickly turn towards the outlook. Outlook is, you see the million home sales, those are less meaningful compared to the percentage change. So the percentage change is showing that 2018, 2019 was a decent year. First quarter was doing better than last year, but then second quarter we are hit with a pandemic, so it's going to be down significantly. Third and fourth quarter, it will be down, but maybe less significantly. And in fact, mortgage data is actually saying that we may actually have a positive condition in third and fourth quarter. And I hope that's the case, but I want to be a little more conservative with less severe decline in the later part of the year. But as we go into 2021, everything should be lighting up positively. Last column, 2021 forecast, GDP positive, job creation positive, home prices rising, but it depends on how much supply we get, how much home building activity, and home sales rising robustly by 13 to 18%. All the missed sales this spring, all catching up in 2021. And my final comment is, even if the pandemic is over with a vaccine discovery, I think we have found some new permanent change from different habits of people, which is like the Zoom meeting, Zoom presentation. I have had many virtual office meetings. Twitter has announced to their employees, you can work from home forever. Facebook is giving more flexibility to work from home. Many companies will also be offering this. So which means that people do not have to live near major job centers. So why live in Chicago if people can be live in much more affordable areas of the country, including say Mississippi, or maybe if somebody needs to work in New Orleans, but if you need to go to office only 1 or twice a week, why not live in Mississippi? So you may begin to see a demand for homes in more rural areas, further away from job centers, which means that Mississippi could be positioned to benefit from these changes that is occurring at the expense of city centers. So some trend to monitor. I did not include in the PowerPoint, but worth mentioning, is just the commercial real estate. I think the commercial market looks to be very challenged, certainly for office and retail spaces. So people specializing in that area, be prepared for some price reductions, for fewer leasing activity. Warehousing looks to be fine. The apartment sector, we were short on the vacancy, so apartments should be fine, but the job situation, whether or not people can pay rents in the later months, and that's questionable. So residential, if you are a residential specialist, things worse is over, things will turn positive. Commercial, much more uncertainty, and in some sectors of the commercial, hold tight because it's going to be a rough ride. But thank you for listening. And now I'm going to stop sharing the slide and turn it back to President Keith Henley.
Great, thank you, Lawrence. As always, I'm captivated with your presentations and always take notes. I do have a couple of questions, and I've got one from Adam Watkins, and he asked about any sustained potential in the shift in buying habits as a result of the COVID-19?
So I think the one is, seeking that single family home. The other part is, even if people are happy, were happy with their current residence, they say since they can work from home more often, they want to have that one special room dedicated as an office space. So if, 3-bedroom, maybe they're looking for the 4th-bedroom house where the 4th bedroom would serve as an office. So maybe from that, they want to have a change of residence. So, that is a possibility. And one immediate impact of the pandemic is condominium demand has fallen. I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, so it's high rises. People do not want to go into condominiums. The elevators push the buttons, who pushed the button prior. So we have seen a drastic decline in the condominium demand compared to the single family. But with the vaccine, those situations should be over by then. But in the meantime, we are seeing this change.
Okay, great. And I've got another question. And you touched on it a little bit toward the end of the presentation, specifically regarding Mississippi. But is there any research to follow what buying habits might develop from buyers relocating from urban areas to rural or suburban areas, and how does that translate to any opportunities for Mississippi economy and obviously the realtors in Mississippi?
Yeah, I think, one will look back in history to look at the time period and say this COVID-19 is certainly a very unique, last time we had anything similar, Spanish flu 100 years ago, but now we have this COVID-19 combined with technology where we can work from home. Back during the Spanish flu, we had to go to work, we had to go to factory. But now that we can work from home, all these different changes that may be occurring. Are we going to have a reallocation of the schools, meaning that, whether or not as people are spreading out further, whether even the school, building a new school to accommodate the distance of how people are changing. So there's a lot of wild card out there. And as realtors, some of you may have better ideas about how things may play out, or, in the position of an advocacy, as you see some of the development changing trends, whether or not you can work with local officials or the governor to see how to accommodate. And from NAR's perspective, one thing that we have been pushing for is that opportunity zones. So some of the previously distressed areas, how do you revitalize those communities with tax breaks so that more livelier community, better, safer community can occur?
Okay, and a couple of other questions. One, you touched on inflation, that your anticipation is that any major uptick in inflation will occur a few years down the road, that you don't see that in the near future?
Yeah, so no inflation this year, no inflation next year. So you'll be in the future years, but also not the 1970s style. 1970 was about 10% inflation. I think we may get, like, say, 5-6% inflation rate, which would be much higher than the normal 1 or 2%. It also means that when inflation is there, mortgage rate will be higher. But we have shown that even with higher mortgage rates, real estates follow the overall consumer price inflation. So if people wait 5 years from now to buy a home, it may be difficult because prices are higher, mortgage rates are higher, but people are buying today, they're getting the low rates and then getting the price appreciation.
Great, great. And one last question, and as a student of politics, this is my question. But of course, 2020 is an election year, and we've had the curveball with the pandemic thrown at us, and it's been maybe a little bit political. But what do you think the impact with the pandemic occurring in an election year versus if this thing does linger through next fall of 2021, how do you see the dynamics, the different dynamics from this year to next year?
Well, my mother always say, talk about religion and politics with everyone. But those are, I get those questions, which is that related to the presidential election year, what we find is that for most Americans, it's pocketbook issue. So as related to the real estate, they are saying, do I have a secure job? Is the mortgage rate good? Is the housing fits my lifestyle? Then they make the decision. Only area where the real estate is impacted from presidential year is Washington, D.C., and the very upper end market, people are hesitating on the decision and how will tax changes greatly impact my finances. But for the middle class, they are just pocketbook issues. So if the mortgage rates are low, inventory is there, they're going to make those decisions. We are in a very unique time related to politics as well as pandemic. Keith, you remember this time last year when we had NAR convention in Washington, D.C., President Trump came and spoke. And at that time, he ran up all those economic figures. And President Trump can exaggerate many things, but he was right on the mark related to economic numbers. Everything was right on the money, all positive figures. And before the pandemic, we were facing labor shortage, just not enough workers for all the needs by the companies. And the wages were rising. So it seemed almost certain that President Trump would get reelected based on the correlation between economy and the presidency. But the pandemic, threw the whole thing into the wild, and let's see how everything develops.
Okay, yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting. That concludes our questions. Do you have any closing remarks you'd like to share with us? And hopefully we'll see you in New Orleans. If not, we'll see you on Zoom via New Orleans, I suppose.
Well, thank you very much for inviting. And, I've been to a couple of, or maybe 3 times on Mississippi Association of REALTORS State Convention in person. And every time, I always enjoy, talking with the great people of Mississippi. So I miss that. I think one thing the video can never capture is that in person, I think that we always capture. So certainly, if the New Orleans happens, it will be great. If not, I'm sure there are legitimate reasons for it. But but thank you, Keith, for inviting me.
Thank you. We appreciate your time, and obviously the presentation was fantastic and gave us a lot to think about and hopefully plan for in the future. So thank you again, Dr. Yoon. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Goodbye.